You ever sit in a room full of people clapping while your soul quietly leaves your body? It was my wedding day, not a Pinterest fairy tale, but it was beautiful. String lights across the backyard, tables covered in eucalyptus and linen, and the kind of laughter that makes you believe maybe, just maybe, things are finally okay. And then she stood up, my sister, champagne in hand, smile painted perfectly, like she'd been rehearsing it in the mirror. Before I toast to the bride and groom, she said, I just want to remind everyone how far my baby sister has come, especially after racking up nearly $30,000 in credit card debt and begging me for help just last month. The room froze. I swear even the wind held its breath. She laughed like it was a harmless joke. Some people chuckled. My husband looked at me, confused, hurt. My knees wanted to give out, but I smiled. I smiled because if I didn't, I would have cried. And not just from the humiliation, not from the betrayal, but from the fact that she knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't some offhand comment. This was strategy. She wanted to remind me, in front of the people I loved, that I still owed her. That no matter how much I rebuilt, I would never really be clean. That toast, it wasn't about celebration. It was about control. And she did it so effortlessly, so publicly, wrapped in laughter and rosé bubbles, like cruelty could be casual if you said it with enough charm. I didn't say a word. I didn't storm out. I didn't even blink. I just looked down at my ring, then up at the fairy lights. And in that moment, I made a promise. She wanted the room to know I was in debt? Fine. But she forgot one thing. Secrets go both ways. We used to share everything. Hair ties, secrets, late night snacks when our parents were asleep, and we were supposed to be too. She was older, louder, prettier, in that magazine cover kind of way, the kind of girl who made friends without trying and left glitter trails wherever she went. I was quieter, more in the background. I learned early how to listen, how to wait, how to let her take the spotlight without making it a competition. We weren't close in the traditional sense, but there was trust, or maybe just the illusion of it. And for a long time, that was enough. Then Mom got sick, and everything changed. Hospitals, paperwork, hospice visits. Somehow, she became the spokesperson of the family, the responsible one, the one who handled everything. While I was still climbing out of a depression I didn't even fully understand. When Mom passed, there was a will. Simple, handwritten, notarized at the bank a few years before. Everything split evenly between us. No drama, no confusion, except, suddenly, there was confusion. She told me, so gently, like she was protecting me, that Mom had wanted her to hold on to my half, just until I was back on my feet. You're not in the right headspace to deal with this stuff right now, she said. And honestly, it's what Mom would have wanted. For you to heal, not stress. And I believed her. Even though I had doubts, even though something about the way she said it felt too smooth. I was tired, grieving. Number and trusting her felt easier than fighting. So I signed the temporary transfer paperwork without asking questions. No copies, no second opinion, just a sister and her word. I went back to therapy, got a job, moved into a studio apartment that smelled like dust and determination. And I waited, not for the money, but for her to do the right thing. Months turned into years. Excuses piled up like unopened mail. It's still tied up in the estate. The market's bad right now. I'm just trying to protect what's yours. until I stopped asking altogether. Because deep down, I knew. She wasn't holding it for me. She was keeping it from me. He didn't ask about the money. Not once. When we first moved in together, I was still paying off a few quiet debts. Therapy bills, old credit cards, a tiny loan I took out just to keep the lights on one winter when the heat went out. I was careful, but not proud. Still, he never judged. Never made me feel like I had to explain why my savings were thin or why I didn't talk much about family money. He thought I came from a modest background. Middle class. Nothing fancy. And technically, he wasn't wrong. But he didn't know that I was supposed to have a cushion. Something set aside. Something my mother wanted me to have in case the world turned cold again. And I didn't tell him. Because how do you say, my sister stole from me, when you're trying to build a life based on trust? So I said nothing. I let him believe I was just working my way up like everyone else. That my hustle was out of ambition, not necessity. I let him think I chose minimalism because I liked it, not because I had no choice. He never pushed, just held my hand through the long days, brought me coffee when I burned the midnight oil, and reminded me that I was more than enough, even without the safety net. And for a while, I convinced myself the past didn't matter, that what was gone was just gone, until that wedding toast, until she threw my silence onto the table like confetti, smiling through it, as if exposing me made her shine brighter. It wasn't just about embarrassment. It was about erasing everything I'd built. The trust in his eyes faltered that night, not because he judged me, but because I hadn't told him first. Because secrets, even small ones, can grow fangs in the dark. I lay awake that night next to a man I loved, wondering if I had just lost more than my dignity. And quietly, I realized something. Maybe silence isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just how they get away with it. There's a sound I'll never forget. Applause, software, hesitant, then louder, awkward, almost embarrassed. The kind of clapping people do when they don't know what else to do. After she finished her toast, the room didn't erupt. It cracked. Some people laughed, but it was the wrong kind of laugh. The kind that slides out when tension makes your spine stiff and you're trying not to look anyone in the eye. I stood there holding a glass I no longer wanted, in a dress I suddenly couldn't breathe in, and I clapped too. I clapped for the woman who just undressed my entire financial history, in front of my new in-laws, my boss, and every person who ever thought I had my life together. Because not clapping would have made it real. Not smiling would have made me the problem. So I smiled, not because I forgave her, but because I needed a second to remember how not to fall apart. He squeezed my hand under the table, gently, like he knew something had shifted, but didn't know what to say. And I don't blame him. No one did. That's the thing about public humiliation wrapped in private history. Most people don't get the context. They just hear a funny anecdote, delivered in a silk dress with perfect makeup, and assume it's love masked as teasing. But I knew better. She wasn't trying to be funny. She was trying to remind me who still had the upper hand. And it worked. Because for the rest of the night, I wasn't the bride. I was the broken girl who once begged for help. The one with messy finances and a past that didn't quite match the curated version I'd spent years rebuilding. I laughed when people approached, shrugged it off with lines like, "Sisters, right?" Or, "She's always been the wild one." But inside, something had gone still. Not angry, not sad, just cold, like a switch had flipped, because that night, surrounded by twinkle lights and half-eaten cake, I stopped hoping she'd ever give back what she took, and I started thinking about how I'd take it myself. Grief is strange. It doesn't knock politely. It lets itself in, rearranges the furniture, and leaves you living in a house you don't recognize. When our mother passed, the world didn't stop. It just got quieter. Uncomfortably so. I remember the funeral, not for the flowers or the hymns, but for the way my sister took over. She moved through the arrangements like a CEO, casket color, guest list, reception menu, all with the calm of someone who'd already buried something long before. I was no match for that kind of efficiency. I was barely functioning, still in therapy, still waking up with a lump in my throat, the size of unfinished conversations. So when she said she'd handle the legal side, the will, the estate stuff, I didn't argue. The will itself wasn't complicated. Our mom had always been clear. Everything was to be split equally between us. 50-50. No conditions. No drama. But suddenly, there were conditions. Just until you're back on your feet, she said, holding the papers with a soft voice and carefully folded concern. You don't need this stress right now. Let me keep it safe. When you're ready, we'll sort it out. I wanted to believe that. Wanted to think she was doing it out of love, out of protection, out of sisterhood. So I signed the temporary transfer form. Without reading every line, without asking for a copy, without realizing how easily trust turns into leverage when someone else is holding the pen. I told myself I was being mature, but looking back now, I was just vulnerable. She never said the money was hers. She didn't have to, because over time, she just stopped talking about it. When I brought it up, she changed the subject. When I pushed harder, she pushed back harder. You really think I'd steal from you? She once snapped, eyes wide like I'd insulted her soul. After everything I've done for you, that guilt, it works, especially when it's coming from someone who knows exactly where your scars are. But what she didn't know was that I kept every email, every vague excuse, every shifting deadline, because even if I wasn't ready to fight yet, I was paying attention. It started with little things, Instagram posts of luxury brunches, a new car, sleek, leased, perfectly photographed. Then a sudden side business, selling curated fashion pieces, followed by a brand launch party that somehow ended up in a local magazine. I watched it all unfold through filtered pixels. At first, I told myself she must have worked hard. Maybe she got a raise, or a bonus, or found some secret hustle I didn't know about. But then I remembered the timing, how her glow-up happened just a few months after Mom's accounts were liquidated, how her business just took off around the same time my calls started going to voicemail. Still, I didn't accuse. I didn't scream. I just observed. Because it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the story she was building, publicly. One where she was the self-made older sister. The success story. The one who took care of Mom's legacy and still had enough drive to launch an empire. The one who made smart investments while I supposedly spiraled and got help. She turned my healing into her marketing. Every dollar she spent wasn't just stolen. It was repurposed into proof. Proof that she deserved more, that she managed better, that she knew how to turn grief into opportunity. I was the cautionary tale in her narrative. The delicate little sister who couldn't be trusted with responsibility. who should be grateful someone else handled the hard stuff. And people believed it because she made it look good, wrapped in aesthetic captions and photo shoots with plants in the background. She even spoke on a podcast once about building from pain and taking care of family when they can't take care of themselves. I listened to that episode on a rainy Wednesday, sitting in the break room of the bank where I processed other people's debt all day. And I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the irony was so loud. It nearly cracked my teeth. She didn't just steal from me, she rewrote the whole story, with me cast as the liability. And somehow, she thought I'd never turn the page. Some people fight fire with fire. I fight it with folders. The night after the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I lay there next to the man I'd just promised forever to, wondering if he regretted saying yes, wondering if he saw me differently now, smaller, weaker, exposed. But while my heart was unraveling, my brain started filing. Every excuse, every vague response, every "I'll get back to you next week." That never came. I remembered them all, not because I wanted to, but because some betrayals imprint themselves like scars you don't ask for. So I got out of bed, opened my laptop, and logged into an old email account I hadn't touched in years. One I only used during Mom's probate process. The inbox was dusty, full of updates from banks, legal offices, and one particularly long thread between the two of us discussing the transfer. She'd attached PDFs back then. She probably thought I wouldn't notice the details, but I wasn't the same person I was 5 years ago. And this time, I read every word. One line stood out. "This is a temporary reassignment for tax purposes. Final release to be processed no later than Q2. I checked the date. That deadline had passed 4 years ago. That's when the shift happened. My grief turned into clarity. My shame turned into documentation. I pulled up the old joint account Mom had opened in both our names. It had been inactive for years, but I still had access. What I saw didn't surprise me. It confirmed what I already knew in my gut: wire transfers, labeled as consulting fees, withdrawals in round numbers that matched her Instagram lifestyle. A balance drained in less than 18 months. I started downloading, saving, screenshotting, organizing everything into folders labeled evidence, timeline, backup. I wasn't angry anymore. I was meticulous, because sometimes the loudest revenge isn't a confrontation. It's a quiet audit, and I was done being the sister who stayed silent. There's something brutally honest about a bank statement. It doesn't sugarcoat, doesn't explain. It just tells you where the money went, whether you're ready or not. Page after page, I followed the digital breadcrumb trail. Withdrawals that didn't match anything I'd approved. Transfers labeled consulting services to her personal business account, one she never disclosed during the probate process. A final wire that emptied the joint account, 2 months before she posted that infamous new chapter caption, champagne in hand, view of downtown from her condo. It was all there, black and white, no room for spin. I stared at the screen in silence. The kind that hums behind your ears when you've finally seen what you didn't want to see. She didn't just keep my inheritance. She laundered it into her reinvention. And the worst part? She knew I wouldn't question it, because she counted on me being the good one, the one who forgives, the one who stays out of family drama, the one who disappears quietly when things get uncomfortable. She didn't think I'd ever dig. But what she forgot is that I spent the last few years rebuilding my life from scratch. I didn't just learn how to survive, I learned how to spot patterns. I learned how to trace data. I learned how to protect the truth, digitally, emotionally, legally. So I kept digging, found voice memos. We left each other during the early stages of the estate. One in particular stopped me cold. She was annoyed, ranting about how I was too emotional to manage anything bigger than a grocery list, and how it made more sense for her to keep the money until I was stable enough not to blow it all on candles and therapy. She laughed at the end of that recording, like it was nothing. But that laugh was going in the folder, because receipts don't lie, and I was finally ready to be believed. People hear revenge and imagine fireworks, screaming matches, slammed doors, some dramatic public takedown where the villain gets what they deserve and the crowd erupts in applause. But that's not what I wanted. I didn't want a scene. I wanted a record. Because there's a difference between revenge and correction. One feeds your ego, the other restores the truth. So I did what I do best. I got methodical. I went to a lawyer. Not one who advertised on billboards or made empty promises about fast settlements. I found someone who specialized in estate fraud and family asset disputes. Quiet, precise, sharp enough to cut through emotional noise. I showed her everything: emails, bank statements, the memo, the will, and the quote that changed everything. Temporary reassignment. She didn't need convincing. This isn't just unethical, she said, flipping through the stack. It's actionable. And just like that, we had a case. It wasn't fast, it wasn't flashy, but it was happening. I didn't text, I didn't warn her. There was no dramatic confrontation, no big phone call where I laid out all the evidence and demanded an apology, because I didn't need an apology. I needed accountability. And let me tell you, when the certified letter was delivered to her boutique studio, the one she used my mother's money to open, she didn't post about that. No vague caption, no aesthetic angle, just silence. And for the first time in years, that silence wasn't mine to carry. This wasn't about punishing her for the wedding toast. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about rebalancing the scale. She tilted when she decided she could rewrite our story with a smile and a wine glass. I wasn't out to ruin her life, but I was done letting her profit from mine. There was no gavel, no courtroom drama, no dramatic face-off in front of an audience. Justice didn't come in fire. It came in the form of paperwork. 3 weeks after that wedding toast, she got the first letter. A formal notice from my lawyer outlining the claim: inheritance misappropriation, breach of fiduciary duty, failure to disclose assets. It was worded clean, cold, professional. No emotion, just facts. I imagined her opening it in her carefully curated office, the one with framed inspirational quotes and minimalist decor, reading it in disbelief while sipping a green juice. She probably wrote off as a business expense. I never heard from her directly, but I knew it landed. Her posts slowed down. The exciting new project she had teased went quiet. People started asking questions in the comments, and then quietly, she turned her profile to private. I didn't gloat, didn't announce it to the world. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about reclaiming something no one saw being taken in the first place. That's the thing about betrayal. It rarely happens in a way that's loud enough for the world to notice. It's slow, strategic, polite even. So when you fight back, People think you're overreacting, but I wasn't reacting. I was correcting. And while the guests from our wedding moved on, while the photos from that night got buried under new memories and milestones, I was building something, quietly, with every email from my lawyer, with every statement gathered, every form notarized. I was taking back a piece of myself, not to prove a point to her, but to remind myself I never needed her permission to own what was mine. My wedding was loud. People laughed, danced, drank, toasted. But justice showed up later, with no music, no guests, no need for applause, just a simple envelope, and the sound of truth taking its seat at the table. There was a time when I thought healing meant reconciliation, that at some point she'd show up on my doorstep with tears in her eyes and say, "I'm sorry, I messed up." And somehow that would fix it. But grief has a way of sanding down your expectations. It teaches you that closure doesn't always come with a bow. Sometimes it comes with boundaries. After the case was filed, I expected her to reach out, not because she cared, but because she hated losing control. But weeks passed, then months, nothing, no phone call, no text, not even a half-hearted legal threat, just silence. At first, that silence felt like absence, a hole, a wound still open. But over time, I started to feel something else. Relief. Because when someone's held power over you for so long, through guilt, through manipulation, through charm that cuts like sugar, it takes time to realize how free you feel once they stop speaking. I stopped waiting for her to be sorry and started asking myself what I needed. Not from her, not from the court, from me. So I made a list. Simple things. Open a small business. Plant herbs in the windowsill. Wake up without checking my phone for drama. Smile in photos, without wondering who would twist the narrative. I didn't want revenge. That was never the point. I wanted peace. Not the fake, curated kind you post on a beach with a caption about letting go, but the real kind. The kind where you walk into your own life and finally feel like the air belongs to you again. I found an old journal Mom gave me before she passed. On the inside cover, she wrote, "Don't let anyone else decide what your life becomes." And maybe that's what this was always about. Not money, not justice, not even family, but agency and the quiet, sacred right to write the next chapter in my own handwriting. It wasn't dramatic. No camera flashes, no gasps in the courtroom, no slow-motion monologues like in the movies. Just a Tuesday morning, a small courtroom with worn-out chairs, stale coffee in the hallway, and a judge who spoke like he'd done this 1,000 times before. And maybe he had. To him, it was just another civil case. Siblings arguing over money, over a dead parent's will, over what they believed they were owed. But to me, it wasn't about dollars. It was about truth finally being spoken out loud. She didn't show up that day. Just her lawyer, cold, clean-cut, detached, the kind of presence you hire when you want to seem untouchable. My lawyer spoke for me. I barely said a word, just nodded when asked to confirm facts, signed what I had to sign, and waited. And then, like a quiet switch being flipped, the verdict came. The court acknowledged the breach, recognized the misconduct, ruled that the assets must be returned, plus interest, accumulated from the moment the will had been ignored. There were no cheers, just a pause, a breath. And for the first time in years, I exhaled without weight sitting on my chest. I looked down at my hands and realized they weren't shaking, not from fear, not from rage. They were steady, Because sometimes justice doesn't roar, it whispers. It shows up in fine print, in a signature, in a line on a court record that quietly restores something you thought was gone forever. On the way out, I didn't look back, didn't check to see if anyone was watching. I just walked through the courthouse doors into a gray, cloudy day. And for once, the weather didn't match my mood. I didn't feel victorious. I felt neutral. And that, oddly enough, felt like a win. Because peace isn't always joy. Sometimes it's just the absence of noise, the stillness you get when someone else's voice no longer lives inside your decisions. There are numbers you can't track. No credit score shows the cost of betrayal. No statement lists the years it takes to rebuild trust after it's been shattered. Quietly, politely, behind the mask of, I was just trying to help. The court may have settled the account, but inside me, there were still balances unpaid. I thought I'd feel lighter, and in some ways, I did. But grief leaves residue, especially when the person you're grieving is still alive. She didn't just steal money, she stole time. Time I could have spent starting sooner. Time I could have used to breathe instead of brace. And maybe that's the part no one warns you about. The emotional interest you keep paying long after the principal's been returned. I kept remembering little things. Birthdays where she didn't show up. Messages I left unread. The way she laughed when she called me fragile, as if my healing was something to be managed instead of honored. And yet, part of me still wanted to understand why. Why someone who once held my hand in the back seat of our mom's car could one day calculate how much she could take without making it look like theft. But then I realized understanding wasn't part of closure. Acceptance was. So I stopped trying to make sense of her choices and started focusing on mine. I began waking up a little earlier, took walks without headphones, started baking again. Something simple, banana bread with chocolate chips, just like Mom used to make when the power went out and we had nothing else to do. I didn't post about it, didn't frame it as some healing journey online. It was mine, quiet, small, honest. Because not everything has to be redeemed. Not every relationship has to be repaired. Some debts are better left, written off. And what matters most is learning how to live with the emotional receipts, without letting them define your balance. There's a kind of wealth that doesn't sit in a bank account. It's not flashy, doesn't earn interest. You can't loan it out, and no one will envy it on paper. But it's real. I felt it the morning I opened the doors to my little cafe. Just a quiet place on the corner, warm wood tables, secondhand chairs, a chalkboard menu smudged from too many edits, no grand opening, no press, just a few friends, a pot of strong coffee, and the sound of a bell over the door that finally rang for me. I used part of the settlement money, sure, but most of it came from something else. Something I'd built slowly, over years of resilience, not revenge. Peace. People think justice fixes everything, but all it really does is give you your space back. The space to move, to breathe, to begin again, without dragging someone else's shadow behind you. That cafe wasn't about coffee. It was about control, about waking up and knowing that I wasn't surviving someone else's decision anymore. I was living mine. I put up a photo by the counter, me and Mom, sitting in the sun on a front porch that doesn't exist anymore. No caption, no frame, just a moment. People walk by it every day and don't know the weight it carries. And I don't explain, because I don't need to. I'm not rich, not in the way she made herself appear to be, but I have enough. And more importantly, what I have is mine. No secrets, no silence, no one holding the pen. While I try to write my story, some people measure success in commas and square footage. I measure mine in mornings like that one. Quiet, steady, with the front door open and nothing left to hide. And honestly, that kind of freedom is priceless. Some people burn bridges with fire. Others do it with a microphone and a smile. That night at my wedding, she wanted to reduce me to a punchline, to remind everyone I was once desperate, in debt, dependent on her. But what she didn't realize is that desperation is temporary, and dignity, when protected in silence, has a long memory. She turned my wedding into a stage for humiliation. I turned the courtroom into a quiet reckoning. No spotlight, no applause, just paperwork, proof, and a ruling she couldn't charm her way out of. I think about that sometimes, how she used 5 seconds to unravel my past, and how I used 5 months to rewrite the truth. She never apologized, but I didn't need her to, because when you walk through life constantly trying to prove you're the good one, you forget goodness doesn't require permission. I didn't destroy her. I didn't drag her name through the mud. I simply told the truth to someone who could do something about it. And maybe that's the real twist, that while she was busy performing control, I was quietly taking it back. One file, one call, one signed affidavit at a time. She'll probably tell people I blindsided her, that I overreacted, that I made things ugly. But the only ugly part was what she did, and hoped I'd stay too quiet to confront. She used a toast. I used a timestamp. She made it personal. I made it legal. Because some endings don't come with explosions. They come with a signature and a silence that finally belongs to you. Not every story ends with applause. Sometimes it ends with a soft breath, with a weight lifted, with the quiet realization that survival doesn't always look like winning. Sometimes it just looks like walking away whole. If you've ever held your tongue when it would have been easier to shout. If you've ever carried truth in your chest because speaking it felt like lighting a match inside your own home. If you've ever chosen peace over performance, then you know what I mean. You know what it's like to let someone believe they've won, just long enough for you to get your strength back. You know what it's like to walk through the wreckage they left and build something softer, stronger, and entirely your own. And if you're still in the middle of it, still clapping at tables you don't belong at, still swallowing truths that deserve air, I see you, and I hope this story reminds you. Silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's safety. And sometimes it's the space you hold until you're ready to speak for real. So if this hit you in a place words usually can't reach, leave a comment. Not for the algorithm, for the ones still pretending they're okay. Tell me, have you ever let the truth wait just long enough to make it land harder? And if you haven't yet, maybe this is your sign. Like the video if it stayed with you. Subscribe if you want more stories that sit in the quiet between justice and grace. And remember, you don't have to yell to be powerful. You don't have to be loud to be heard. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all, until it's time.